All right, ready to dive into something seriously creepy. Let's talk The Conjuring. I gotta say, your analysis has me thinking about this film in a whole new light.
It's definitely more than just your average horror flick.
Right. You picked up on so many details that make this haunting so darn effective. Like that opening scene with Annabelle. I mean, come on, talk about setting the mood.
Oh yeah, throwing Annabelle in right off the bat, that's not just about giving us the creeps, it's almost like a statement.
A statement.
Like the filmmakers are saying, look, if you can't even handle Annabelle, turn back now.
I like that. A horror movie test.
Exactly. You see that doll, that creepy little face, and you know you're in for something.
Intense. It's brilliant. And then, bam, we shift gears. We're introduced to the Perron family, moving into this old farmhouse. And, you know, I love how The Conjuring uses that classic slow burn approach. You talked about that a lot in your analysis.
Yeah, it's a classic for a reason. It just gets under your skin. Those early scenes, you know, like the family dog refusing to go inside, the clock's all stopping at 3.07.
See, those things, they're not terrifying on their own, are they?
No, not really, but that's the point. It's all about creating that unsettling feeling, like something's not right here.
Exactly. Like when you get that feeling someone's staring at you, even though you haven't turned around, it's that anticipation.
Yes. Like Hitchcock said, there is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it.
Okay, so you just brought up Hitchcock. You know I'm a sucker for a good film reference. But you're so right. And The Conjuring is a masterclass in suspense, especially that hide and clap scene you mentioned.
Oh, don't even get me started on that scene.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
It's so simple. Hide and clap. We've all played it. But the way Juan directs it, it's masterful. Those long, drawn-out shots and the silence. You're just waiting for something to jump out.
You know, when it finally does, that slow reveal of the clapping hand. Oh, man.
It's pure genius, and it's so much more effective than a jump scare. It's that fear of the unknown, you know? It sticks with you.
Speaking of things that stick with you, we gotta talk about Bathsheba Sherman, the real-life inspiration behind this whole haunting. I mean, a witch who sacrifices her own child. That's some next-level evil.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, the things people are capable of.
Right. And what I find so fascinating is how the film uses this real historical figure to tap into something, I don't know, more universal. It's not just a haunted house anymore. It's like this idea that evil can invade your home, the one place where you should feel safe.
It's tapping into those primal fears, for sure.
And what's really interesting is how they weave in details from Bathsheba's actual life, her tragic backstory, the alleged satanic practices, even the time of her death, 3.07 a.m., which keeps popping up throughout the film.
It's like they're blurring the lines between reality and fiction.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what if there's more to this story than we know? I mean, I know better, but I still found myself Googling Bathsheba Sherman after the movie.
You and me both.
It really gets you thinking, right, about the things that scare us, the things we maybe don't want to think about.
Exactly. And with The Conjuring, it's not just about a haunted house, is it?
Right. Like we were saying, it's that fear of evil invading your home, your family, and the really messed up things people can do to each other. That's where it goes from creepy to terrifying, at least for me.
Yeah, and you can tell the filmmakers really honed in on that family dynamic in this film. In your analysis, you talked about Carolyn Perron and the whole possession angle.
Because it's one thing to be scared by some ghost.
Right.
But having your own mother, the person who should be protecting you, turn on you like
It's terrifying. And what makes it worse, you see how much they love each other as a family at the start. So when it starts falling apart.
Exactly. It just makes those scary moments even more, I don't know, impactful. Like that scene you mentioned where Carolyn tries to hurt one of her daughters.
Oh man, that scene, it just gets you in the gut. Because it shows how insidious this haunting is.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just about moving objects or making creepy noises, it's trying to turn them against each other.
And that plays on something you talked about earlier, that fear of not being able to trust anyone, even your own family.
Exactly. It's a classic horror trope, but they do it so well in this film.
Right. It makes you wonder, what would you do in that situation if you couldn't even trust your own family?
You'd hope you'd know, but
yeah,
who knows. But speaking of effective horror, we gotta talk about the guy behind the camera, right?
James Wan. Okay, so your analysis of his directing style was spot on. The long takes, the sound design, he knows how to build suspense.
Doesn't he? He's a master at it. Like that scene where the camera's slowly pushing in on the rocking chair.
In the kids' room?
Yeah. You just know something's gonna happen, but the anticipation is killing you.
And it gets you every time.
Every time. It's like,
right.
He's playing with your expectations. And that basement scene with Carolyn, too,
Oh, yeah.
where the camera follows her, going deeper and deeper into the darkness, you're right there with her.
Feeling your way through, and you just know something awful is down there.
Exactly. And the sound, too. Don't even get me started on the sound design in this movie.
Man, it's so good. Like, it's not always about what you hear, it's about what you don't, you know.
The silence is deafening. Think about that scene where the lights go out in the house.
Yeah.
Everything just stops, and then you just hear these tiny little creaking sounds.
And you're like, what was that?
It's brilliant. Your mind starts racing, trying to fill in the blanks.
Your imagination is almost worse than anything they could show you, honestly.
Oh, 100%.
You know what else I love about this movie?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Juan uses so many practical effects.
Oh, for sure. For sure. There's nothing like it, is there?
It's like, for me, CGI, sometimes it takes me out of it. But when you see something that's actually there on set,
Yeah.
like that scene where the witch's body is contorting in the attic,
Oh my God, yeah.
it's just so much creepier.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they actually had to figure out how to make that happen.
It's like stop motion almost, the way it moves.
Yeah, there's a weight to it. And it feels more real somehow, even though it's something totally impossible.
It just goes to show sometimes the old ways are the best, right?
Right. But okay, so we've talked about all these amazing elements, the directing, the sound, the story. But what do you think it is about The Conjuring that really sticks with people? Because it's been like, what, more than a decade since this movie came out? And people are still talking about it.
I think it's a few things, honestly. I mean, like we said, James Wan is a master at what he does.
For sure.
And you've got these compelling characters that you actually care about. And then there's this whole layer of like history and folklore that makes it feel more real somehow. Like it could actually happen.
It gets in your head for sure. And it's funny because it's a horror movie, right? But at its core, it's also a story about love and faith.
That's so true. The Warrens, they have this unwavering belief in what they're doing. They really believe they're helping people.
Exactly. And that's a powerful thing to see, even in the middle of all this darkness.
Definitely.
So, okay, we've dug into the psychology of it all, talked about the filmmaking techniques, but what would you say is the most effective thing The Conjuring does to scare the pants off of us?
Honestly, I think it's how it plays on those deep-seated fears we all have. The fear of the unknown, the things that go bump in the night, the fear that the people we love could be not themselves.
See, and that's what gets me. That's the stuff that sticks with you long after the credits roll.
For sure, it reminds you that maybe the scariest things aren't the ones we can see, you know?
Oh, that is a chilling thought to end on, but you're right. So great job on that analysis, seriously. It's been great talking to you, unpacking all the layers of The Conjuring. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Let us know if you've got any theories of your own, and keep those lights on tonight. Or don't, maybe you're brave. We'll catch you next time.
You ever get that, like, spine-chilling feeling
Mm-hmm.
when you're home alone at night and every little sound, every creak, every groan suddenly has you freaked out?
Oh, absolutely.
It's kind of the vibe I got watching The Conjuring 2, you know?
Yeah.
It wasn't just the jump scares. Those got me too, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But there's this, like, this underlying sense of dread, this unsettling feeling that really sticks with you.
Oh, it gets under your skin for sure.
Totally. So today, we're going to do a deep dive into The Conjuring 2. Figure out what makes this film tick, why it's so darn effective.
Sounds good.
We're going beyond those jump scares, those gotcha moments.
Right.
We want to understand how it gets in your head and stays there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's like it's a masterclass in atmosphere.
Yes.
Creating a sustained sense of unease.
Exactly. We're not talking about your run-of-the-mill haunted house here.
Yeah.
The Conjuring 2 knows how to tap into something deeper, something much more unsettling.
It does.
So to get us started, let's set the scene.
Okay.
1977, we're in Enfield, England,
Yeah, deal.
and we're introduced to the Hodgson family,
Right.
a single mother and her 4 kids living in a seemingly ordinary house.
Right. Seems like it. Seems normal enough.
Yeah, until things start getting really, really strange. We're talking moving furniture, disembodied
The
voices,
whole shebang.
the works, like classic haunting stuff.
Yeah, yeah. But it's that intersection of the ordinary and the extraordinary. That's what makes The Conjuring 2 so effective.
Right, because it could be anyone, anywhere, right?
Absolutely. That's it. It's that it could happen to me factor.
Exactly. So you've got this family just trying to live their lives, and bam, their world is upended by these creepy events.
And then, of course, you have Ed and Lorraine Warren enter the picture,
Oh, right.
the paranormal investigators.
Based on the real-life couple. Right.
Yes. Adds a whole other layer there.
Totally. So we've got our setting, we've got our haunted family, but then the film throws us a curveball.
Oh. How so?
Because we start to see glimpses of Janet.
One of the daughters.
Right. And it seems like she might be faking some of this stuff.
Interesting.
It makes us question, is this real? Or are these kids just messing around?
Ah, that element of doubt. Love it. So smart.
It is. And it's unsettling because we've all been there, right?
Totally. Questioning what's real, what's not, especially with this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, how much of what we believe is real is just us wanting it to be, right?
100%, yeah. And that's where the real fear creeps in, I think. When you can't trust your own judgment.
Right, because you start doubting yourself, like, wait, did I see that? Or was it just my imagination?
Totally. And The Conjuring 2 is full of these moments that play with our perceptions. Like that scene, and this one really got me, where Janet's sleepwalking again. The source material went into a lot of detail about this scene. They described how she ends up downstairs in the living room, in the middle of the night. But here's the really creepy part. She's speaking in this deep, raspy voice.
Oh, yeah. Like an old man's voice, right?
Exactly. It's totally chilling. And it's another example of how the film uses Janet's vulnerability to freak us out. I mean, she's just a kid.
Absolutely. It plays on our deepest fears, The idea of a child being possessed or controlled by something evil, it just sends shivers down my spine.
No kidding. And the way Juan directs it, it's like he's inviting us into this nightmare. I remember reading about that scene in the source material where Janet is standing on the window ledge during a huge thunderstorm.
Oh, yeah. Intense scene.
The wind is howling, the window's rattling, and you're just waiting for something awful to happen.
And the brilliance of that scene is that we don't actually see anything, right?
Exactly. It's all about what we don't see, which is almost always scarier than what we do see, in my opinion.
100%. Our imaginations just take over, and we fill in the blanks with our worst fears.
Right. And the way the source material described it, Juan actually used practical effects to make everything feel even more real, more menacing.
Oh, I love that he uses practical effects whenever he can. It makes such a difference.
I agree. It just adds to the whole believability factor. Like, this stuff could actually be happening. The source material even pointed out how the curtains in that scene billow inward, as if something's trying to claw its way in. Oof, so creepy.
Ugh, yeah. You can practically feel the presence of something evil just outside that window. And that's the beauty of practical effects. They just tap into something primal.
Right. Speaking of primal, let's talk about the guy behind the camera for a second. James Wan. Talk about a master of horror.
The man knows how to scare us, that's for sure.
He really does. But it's not just about the scares,
What do you mean?
Well, I was reading in the source material how Wan really emphasizes sound design in his films. He uses these subtle, often unsettling noises to get under our skin.
Oh, totally. Sound is so important in horror.
So crucial. Like that creaking sound that follows Janet around the house. It's barely noticeable at first, but it slowly starts to drive you crazy.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you mean. It's like, is it real? Or am I imagining it?
Exactly.
It messes with your head.
And that's what makes it so effective.
Absolutely, because it creates this atmosphere of paranoia and unease. You're constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right. It's like he's playing with our minds.
Yeah.
But in the best way possible, of course.
Well, maybe best is debatable.
Haha, fair enough.
Yeah.
But seriously, the sound design in The Conjuring 2 is top-notch.
Definitely agree. It's masterful. Really elevates the whole thing.
For sure. But you know what else struck me about The Conjuring 2? It's not just about jump scares and creepy sounds.
What else is there?
It actually delves into some pretty deep themes too.
Oh, yeah. Like what? Tell me more.
Well, for one thing, there's this whole idea of faith.
Right. With Ed and Lorraine Warren, their faith is a big part of their story.
Exactly. And the source material really highlighted that, how their faith is presented as a central element of their work. They're not just paranormal investigators, they're like warriors battling against evil.
Totally. It's like they're using their faith as a weapon against the darkness.
Yes. And I thought that was really interesting how the film explores the power of belief in the face of something so terrifying and unknown.
Yeah, it makes you think, what would you do in that situation?
Right. Would your faith be enough to protect you? I don't know. It's a scary thought. And speaking of scary thoughts, there's this other theme that the film touches on that really freaked me out. The whole concept of knowing a demon's name.
Ah, yes. It's a creepy one. It's like this ancient belief, right? Like, if you know a demon's true name, you have power over it.
Right. And the source material mentioned that this idea plays a pretty significant role in the climax of the film.
Oh, that's right, yeah. It's a powerful concept.
It really is. And it makes you wonder about the Warrens themselves, you know, because they're facing these incredibly powerful dark forces head on.
Yeah, like you think about it, that has to take a toll, right?
Totally. I mean, the source material even hinted that these cases, they change them, they leave scars. Makes you think, what's scarier? The demons themselves, or the effect they have on us, on our sanity.
Right, like even if you survive an encounter with something like that, are you ever truly the same? It's a chilling thought.
It is, and it makes me think that maybe that's what we're really responding to when we watch a film like The Conjuring 2.
Right.
It's not just about being entertained by scares, it's about confronting something deeper, something unsettling about the world and our place in it.
Oh, absolutely. I think horror, when it's done well, it holds up a mirror to our deepest fears, our anxieties about the unknown.
You know, the source material even touched on that idea, how these kinds of stories, they often tap into very real anxieties. The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing control.
Absolutely. And those fears, they're universal, they're primal. It's no wonder these stories resonate with us so deeply.
So we've got a film that expertly blends classic horror elements with psychological suspense, a healthy dose of real-world anxiety, and on top of that, it's a pretty darn good story.
It's true. The Conjuring 2 really does fire on all cylinders. It's a masterclass in modern horror, no doubt.
It really is. So, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking it out. But be warned, you might want to leave the lights on afterwards.
Definitely don't watch it alone.
Good advice.
Yeah.
And that's it for our deep dive into The Conjuring 2.
Until next time.
Keep exploring those dark corners of your imagination. Picture this. 1981, a murder trial, and the defense. The devil made me do it. Crazy, right?
It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie.
And it is. We're doing a deep dive on the case that inspired The Conjuring. The devil made me do it.
Yeah, this wasn't just some Hollywood invention. This was a real-life case that grabbed everyone's attention, made people really think about this stuff. It even, forced the courts to consider, could demonic possession actually be a thing in the legal system? How do you even process that?
It's wild. And we've got these excerpts, like a super in-depth look at the movie that'll help us pick apart the real stuff from the stuff they made up for the screen.
Exactly, because it wasn't just about one guy and whether he was guilty, It became this whole public debate about free will. If you're controlled by something else, are you responsible? And what does that even mean for the law?
So the movie's got Ed and Lorraine Warren, right? Those paranormal investigators.
Oh yeah, they were huge, especially after those Amityville horror cases.
Exactly. And our source says they weren't just, consultants on this. They were really in the thick of it, helping defend Arnie Johnson.
They were key, almost like a link between the normal world and the supernatural stuff the defense was using. And the movie does a cool thing. It doesn't just show what happened, but also how the Warrens played into it, their beliefs, how they dealt with this whole insane situation.
So it wasn't just Hollywood bringing in the big names for the drama. They were a real part of this whole thing. But hold on, they got involved even before Arnie Johnson was in the picture, right? It started with a kid named David Glatzel.
Yeah, the movie starts with this terrifying possession of David, this really intense exorcism scene. And that's when Arnie Johnson steps up, crazy brave, and basically says to the demon, "Take me instead."
Whoa, and it actually works. The demon goes into him.
That's the creepy part. The film shows this, transference of evil, and right away, Arnie is not the same. And the eyes, we see these little changes, something's off with him.
It's that classic horror thing, right? We see the monster under the surface, but nobody else knows what's up yet.
Totally. And the people around him, they're reacting to these weird vibes he's giving off, but they don't know what's happening. And we're just sitting there oh man, when's it all gonna hit the fan? And the movie really takes its time getting to the actual murder, which makes it even creepier.
Okay, so we've got this buildup, this awful feeling that something's coming. But before we get into the murder, how does the film show the possession? Because we're talking about an actual demon, right? that could get pretty intense visually.
You'd think it would be all crazy visuals and special effects, but it's not. The real horror comes from inside Arnon, his fear, the fact that he's losing himself. It's more psychological, you know?
So it's more about the terror of losing control, being taken over by something awful.
Exactly. And it's scary because you relate to Arnon, you feel for him, even though he's doing terrible things, but then, bam, the movie switches gears. We go from supernatural horror to, like, a courtroom drama.
Which is where it gets truly bizarre. They actually use demonic possession as a defense in court for murder.
Oh yeah, they went there. And as you can imagine, it didn't go over well with everybody. The film shows how much skepticism the Warrens faced, from the lawyers, the judge, even the jury.
I bet. It's one thing to believe that stuff, but to convince a whole courtroom. How do you even start to prove something like that?
That's what's so interesting. How do you make the invisible visible? How do you argue that something beyond our world, beyond what the law understands, can be held responsible? The movie captures that weirdness so well.
So did they buy it? Did this devil made me do it defense actually work in court?
Well,
Wouldn't want to spoil it for you.
of course not, of course not. But it brings up this huge question. What if someone really believes they were possessed? Even if they do something terrible, can we blame them? How do we separate the person from the demon? Yeah, there's no easy answer to that. It's something the film really digs into. It makes us confront the unknown and how it messes with our ideas of justice, free will, everything.
And that leads us to another part of the story. Because it's not just about the murder and the trial. The movie throws in this whole occultist character. Who is that, and were they a real part of the case?
That's where Hollywood gets creative. They needed a human bad guy, someone to represent evil on purpose. Arn, he's more of a victim in all this.
So they wanted someone who chose the darkness, who went after it intentionally, unlike Aron's situation.
Exactly. The occultist is all about chasing evil while Arnie not caught in something way over his head.
It's so cool how the movie mixes it all up, the true crime, the courtroom drama, and then the supernatural horror with the occultist.
Yeah.
Keeps you guessing where the real evil is coming from.
Right, and that's what makes it so effective. Because even though the occultist is made up, it plays on this really deep fear, the idea that someone out there is messing with dark forces, bringing evil into our world.
And that's almost scarier than just a random demonic possession, isn't it? Because it means someone's doing it on purpose. It makes you wonder.
It makes you wonder if the scariest things out there are the ones we create ourselves.
Okay, so we've got the real case, the made-up stuff, but what about the message? What's the Conjuring, the devil made me do it, really trying to say?
It's like all those Conjuring movies, there's always something deeper going on. And in this one, I think it's that whole idea of love being stronger than evil.
Right, like you've got Ed and Lorraine, their relationship's a huge part of these movies. They have this bond, this strength, even when things get terrifying.
Exactly. It's not just romantic love, though that's there too. It's their faith, how they're totally committed to each other, and how they really care about the people being messed with by this darkness. Love is like their fuel.
Which is really interesting because you've also got Arn and Debbie, their love story. They're young, totally in love, and she never gives up on him, even when everyone else thinks he's lost it.
And that's what makes it so sad. It's like even the purest love, maybe it's not always enough against this kind of evil. Makes you think about how strong we can be, how much love can handle.
So if love isn't always enough, what chance do we have against something like that?
And the film doesn't shy away from that question. It's like, it's asking us, what do WE believe in enough to fight for? Even when it's scary, when we're not sure.
So we've got love, but there's also faith, especially with the Warrens. But then you've got the occultist, and their beliefs are a bit different.
Totally. It's like the film is saying that what you believe can be good or bad. The Warrens, their faith makes them stronger, but it's also tested like crazy.
And then there's the occultist, choosing the dark side, fully embracing evil.
Exactly. You've got this contrast that makes you think about what it means to believe in something. What do we put our faith in? What happens when it's shaken, when someone uses it for bad stuff? It's a big question for everyone, not just the characters.
It's what makes it more than just a horror movie, right?
Right.
You've got demons, murder, but it's also about bigger stuff like faith, love, good versus evil.
You got it. And it works because it's still a story that feels real, you know? It gets to you, even with the supernatural stuff.
It makes you wonder, if you were on that jury, how could you decide? How do you balance the facts of the crime with this idea of demonic possession?
That's the legacy of this case. It really got people thinking, and it's still something we talk about because it comes down to something deeper than whether demons are real.
What do you mean?
Well, the movie and the case itself, they show us that humans are capable of anything good or evil. And how do we deal with that? How do we understand it? How do we judge it? Those are questions we're always going to ask.
This deep dive has turned everything I thought I knew about this case upside down. I mean, the devil made me do it. Sounds crazy at first. But the film, the real events, it's so much more complicated than that.
Totally. It's about the limits of what we can understand, what our legal system can handle, even what we believe as people.
So if you're listening and you saw the movie, maybe you thought it was just a wild ride. Hopefully this gives you something else to think about.
And if you haven't seen it, this case, the way they use it in the Conjuring world, it's really something else. True crime, horror, makes you think about big questions, it's got it all.
It definitely stays with you. But there's one thing we haven't really gotten into yet, the actual trial. What evidence did they use? How did they even argue for the whole demonic possession thing in court?
Now that's where it gets really interesting. The movie touches on the trial, but it doesn't go into the details, you know?
Right, they got to keep things moving. But that's what we're all about here, digging into those details. So let's go back to that courtroom and see how this crazy defense actually played out. All right, so we're back in the courtroom, 1981, and this wild defense demonic possession is on the table. What were the prosecutors even thinking?
Can you imagine trying to argue against that? They had their work cut out for them. The prosecution, they stuck to the facts, you know? They built their case around what they could prove. They were saying that Arne Johnson's actions, they were his own. Maybe he was influenced by stuff, going through something, but it wasn't some, like, demon pulling the strings.
So they weren't saying demons don't exist. It was more like, that's not how we do things in court.
Exactly. They were like, look, believe what you want, but the law needs proof. So they focused on Arne Johnson's mental state, what he was doing before the murder, anything that could explain why he did it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But the defense? They had the Warrens, these big-time paranormal guys.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence did they bring in?
This is where it gets really interesting. The Warrens actually testified. They talked about the kid, David Glatzel, the one they thought was possessed, and how Arne Johnson got involved. They talked about their investigation, tried to show that there was a connection between this demonic thing and what Arne Johnson did.
So they're talking about seeing supernatural events, maybe showing photos or recordings from their investigations. Did the court actually accept that?
That's the thing. The Warrens, they could talk about their experiences, but the judge, he said most of their evidence wasn't allowed, especially anything that directly proved demons were real.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just bring a Ouija board into a murder trial.
Exactly. It was this weird situation, right? This crazy defense. But the court still had to follow the rules. And those rules, they didn't really have room for the supernatural.
So if they couldn't use the supernatural stuff, how did they try to convince the jury? Did they have any arguments that, like, fit into a regular legal case?
They did. And this is why people are still talking about this case today. The defense, they basically said that Arne Johnson wasn't in control when he committed the murder. They compared it to cases where someone pleads insanity or isn't mentally fit to stand trial. They were saying that even if the jury didn't believe in the demon, something was wrong with Arne Johnson. He wasn't in his right mind.
So they were saying that whatever caused it, demon or not, he wasn't responsible because of his mental state.
You got it. They argued that this possession, whether it was real or just in his head, it messed him up so badly that he didn't know what he was doing.
Man, that's a tough one to wrap your head around. Legally, morally, it brings up so many questions. And it shows you why this case is so interesting. It makes us really think about free will, responsibility, if we're always in control of our own minds.
For sure. It makes you wonder, if someone does something terrible when they're truly delusional, no matter what's causing it, are they really guilty? It's a question that still comes up today in law and philosophy.
This deep dive has been quite the trip. We went from Hollywood to a real-life courtroom and everywhere in between. Demons, the legal system, what makes us human, it's all connected.
It shows that the best stories blend fact and fiction, history, and the unexplained. It's all part of the same crazy tapestry.
For anyone listening who heard "The Devil Made Me Do It" and laughed, I get it. But this case, it's a lot more than that. It's about how strong belief can be, how complex our minds are, and how even our legal system has its limits when things get really weird.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most frightening things are the ones we can't explain. They make us question everything we thought we knew about the world and ourselves.
And on that note, we're going to leave you with more questions than answers this week. If you're intrigued, go check out the full story of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. This case still has people talking, and it makes you think, maybe the line between what we believe and what's real, maybe it's not so clear after all.